Okay. I see the badge saying that we're live to YouTube. So if you are joining us via YouTube, welcome. We will be getting started in just a few minutes.
There we are.
Okay. I see the badge saying that we're live to YouTube. So if you are,
Sorry.
that's okay. It's good to be.
I'm going to admit those two people actually. Oh wait. Never mind. They're back in the waiting room. Just let me know when you'd like them in and I can do that.
Okay. That's good. Okay. Okay, I think we should go ahead and start letting folks in.
Cool. I'll go ahead and do that.
Good morning and welcome to Janine and Sarah and Jay. And then if you're already not named in this way, please go ahead and rename yourself to your name, then a comma, and the city or the local government, I should say, that you work for. And then if you want to include your preferred pronouns like he, him, or she, her, or they, them, please include that as well. And we'll wait for some more folks to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started once we kind of get a critical mass, a few minutes, hopefully after 9. Oh, and I should have said, if you're looking for the rename function, just hover over your photo and click the little dots that appear. Oh, perfect. And then click the rename. I see we've got some more folks joining. Welcome to the Utah 100 Communities meeting for local governments. We are still just waiting a couple more minutes for everyone to join, and then we will get started. And if you are named Christopher Thomas in Zoom, that's my fault because I sent you all my link. So it thinks you are all Christopher Thomas. Please rename yourself by hovering over your photo. Click the little dots and then click the rename function. And then we're going to ask everybody who's joining to please include which local government they are representing. Thank you everyone for joining. We're just waiting a couple more minutes to get started for our Utah 100 Communities local governments meeting. We really appreciate you all being here this morning. And let's just wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. By the way, if we do hear folks, maybe who don't know that they're not muted and they're, having a conversation or there's things going on in the background, we might go ahead and just mute you. The host just muted me. But I unmuted myself. This is great. I see we've got several more folks joining. I see Vicki. Good morning, Vicki.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good.
We're still just having folks join, and then we'll get started probably a couple of minutes after the hour. And I see Emily joined. Emily, welcome.
Thank you. I just got my personal hotspot set up about 1 minute ago. It took a whole run around with Verizon, but I'm here.
Wow. Well, that's great. We probably still, I'm assuming you probably still don't want to do a small group breakout, but if you do, just let me know.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my concern is that this hotspot may not be quite strong enough to, my concern is that it might be inconsistent. So I will let you know. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you for everybody who is joining our Utah 100 Communities meeting for local government officials. We're about 2 past the hour. I don't know why this is, but I tend to like to wait till 4 minutes past the hour. So let's just wait a couple more minutes and then we will get started. Okay, well, I think we've got a great group of folks joining us this morning. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So Shannon, if you wouldn't mind queuing up the slide deck, that would be great. Excuse me. All right. Thank you so much. Okay, well, my name is Christopher Thomas, and it's really exciting to be able to welcome you all this morning for our meeting for the Utah 100 Communities. And this morning's meeting is specifically for officials from local governments. The governance subgroup has been hard at work drafting a governance agreement for all of the eligible cities and counties to review and consider joining onto as the next step of the Community Renewable Energy Program process. And my name is Christopher Thomas. I work for Salt Lake City in the Sustainability Department. And so I will be one of the presenters today, but we've got a number of folks from different local governments who've been heavily engaged in drafting this governance agreement, presenting different parts of today's presentation. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go through the agenda just so you have a sense of what's coming up over the next few hours. So the next part that we'll go into is just briefly why even create a new renewable energy program? because I think some folks may wonder what what this program that we are hoping to create, how it's different from what's already out there. Then we'll have a overview of the governance agreement, kind of the key elements, followed by a 5-minute break. Then we will really delve into program expenses, cost sharing, and the concept of anchor communities, followed by another 5-minute break. Then we will delve deep into how the agreement proposes to do voting, and then we will go into the next steps. And one thing I should have mentioned but didn't is that for the program expenses, the voting, and the next steps, we do have small group breakouts. So I know that it can be sort of impractical in a really large group to have good discussion and good questions and back and forth. So when we do our small group breakouts, we're hoping to have, groups of 5 or 6, no more than 5 or 6 folks in each group, so that there can be that back and forth. So that is our proposed agenda for today. Next slide, please. And next slide. So just to go over some of the logistics. This morning's interactive Zoom meeting is for local government officials. If for some reason you are joining us today by Zoom and you are not a local government official, we would invite you to instead either view the YouTube live stream of this meeting, which is on the Utah 100 Communities channel, or join the later meeting today at 2 p.m., which is specifically for community partners and members of the public. Another housekeeping issue, that if you haven't already, please use the Zoom rename function to change your name to your first and last name, comma, the local government that you are here representing. And then if you want to, your preferred pronoun like he, him, or she, her, or they, them in parentheses. And partially this is because I accidentally sent my Zoom link to everyone. So I noticed there's a number of folks who are identified in Zoom as Christopher Thomas. That's because I sent out my link. So please do rename yourself with your own name. And the way you do that is just hover over your own picture, click the little ... button and click rename. That's how you rename yourself if you've never done that before. Okay, please also do enter your full name into the chat. We're just trying to make sure we know who all attended. Please do stay muted. When we're all together in the larger group, we will ask you all to unmute and turn on your camera as available when we're in the smaller groups. And if we do feel like we're hearing somebody and it seems like they may not know that they're unmuted, we may go ahead and mute you just to minimize disruptions, but there will be time for you to participate throughout the day. Okay, next slide, please. So just going by the registration up, and Shannon, just so you know, there we go. Great, we're back. We've got people registered for this morning's meeting from all of these different eligible local governments. Hopefully we didn't miss anybody. But if you if you are here representing eligible local government, but you are not listed, please do note that in the chat so that we can make sure to add your community. Great. Next slide, please. Okay, I am now going to hand over the presentation reins to Michael Shea from Salt Lake County, who's going to talk about why should we create a new renewable energy program.
Excellent. Thanks, Christopher. Welcome, everybody. So yes, as Christopher mentioned, we thought we'd kind of just start with some larger context about why we're here, why we're trying to achieve what we're trying to achieve. By kind of looking, why is this program necessary? What given kind of the available suite of options for renewable energy in Salt Lake, in Utah, why do this program? And so for a couple, just kind of a quick energy, you can really break down the energy world into two different sections. One is the physical, the power plants, the power lines, the grid itself. And then on the other side, there's the accounting, so who pays for what and how much. And that's really where most programs are focused, is when you bring a new energy asset online, it's what you're paying for. You're not getting 100% of your physical power from that one source, but you're paying for 100% of that. And so we call that 100% net energy. And so that's what this program is hoping to achieve, is 100% net renewable energy. So what your citizens and your communities and your businesses will be paying for is 100% net renewable energy. It's obviously incredibly popular right now. Renewable energy has become the cheapest form of energy available in almost all markets. It's incredible to see how quickly the pricing has come down. And so part of the idea of the program is to be able to take advantage of incredibly cheap renewable prices. But so what's available currently in the state? So Rocky Mountain Power is our primary utility for all of our communities. They serve about 75% of the state. And really beginning kind of in the 2000s, they started offering options for residents and businesses that wanted to have cleaner forms of energy. And that really started with the Blue Sky program. And what Blue Sky does is really you pay a little extra on your monthly utility bill, and those funds go towards certificates and credits that kind of go into a fund that will purchase either small parts of renewable energy credits for like a wind farm in Iowa, or lately going to energy efficiency programs, or kind of smaller scale, but not sort of direct energy purchasing programs. And so they got that program started really back when renewables were still very expensive. It was beginning to generate interest, and the utility wanted to provide a possible option for people that wanted to have their energy, at least pay money towards cleaner forms of energy. And so that program has been going on for almost 15 years now. It's a little outdated in terms of where we're currently at and where the technology's at. It has done a lot of good. It's been a great program, but it doesn't quite do what needs to be done in terms of purchasing large scale renewables. And so a few years ago, to scale that up, Rocky Mountain Power created the Subscriber Solar program. And so that really was the first opportunity for residents and businesses to be able to directly purchase clean energy. And so they built a solar farm, I think down in Milford, Utah. I think it's about 30 megawatts. And the idea is that residents and businesses can purchase blocks. So more expensive than your standard electricity bill. And you can purchase a series of, I think, 200 or 300 kilowatt blocks. And basically that goes towards paying for the actual facility. And then you can actually say that your energy is 100% net renewable. And so that really was the first opportunity for Utahns in Rocky Mountain Power's program to be able to truly purchase clean renewable energy. That program sold out pretty much in the first, I think, year or 2 years. And that was done on an optional case-by-case basis. And so, a resident or a business would have to go to, let Rocky Mountain Power know they want to purchase this. And so it was done on a smaller scale, and 20 to 30 megawatts is very small, considering when you think about the overall electricity needs, excuse me, for Rocky Mountain Power's service area. So it was a good first step, and Rocky Mountain Power, I believe, is planning on expanding the program, but the new facility, the new solar farm, is not going to come online, I think, for at least a couple years. And so that's really been maxed out. And so that is when what started with Salt Lake City, Park City, and Summit County really wanted to go big and really try to offer their residents and businesses the chance to truly, as a community level, to go 100% renewable. And so that's really where the idea for this program came from. I should have mentioned Rocky Mountain Power is a monopoly. They are a state regulated utility, meaning that by law, they don't have competition. And so in other states and other electricity markets, you can actually go out and choose your utility provider and base that on, whether it's the cheapest option or it's the cleanest option. But you can, go out on the marketplace and kind of select what you want. We don't have that option here in Utah. And so we have to work with the utility. And so the cities I previously mentioned began reaching out and starting the conversations. And after many years of work, the HB 411, which was the bill, because it was required by law, passed, and that's what gave birth to this program itself. Ashim, you can go to the next slide. So this kind of just gives a good breakdown of what the Community Renewable Energy Program does versus what's currently available. And so like I mentioned, Utah Blue Sky is just renewable energy certificates. And again, those are kind of an antiquated way of purchasing renewable energy. You basically go out and purchase energy from wherever in the country it's available. And so you're not directly getting that energy. But Subscriber Solar, like I mentioned, does that, and so does this program. We wanted to make sure that we build the assets in as close to our communities as possible. In addition to being, directly powering our homes and businesses, we also can help provide jobs and infrastructure to build out Utah's renewable energy portfolio. And so both Subscriber Solar and the Community Renewable Energy Program does that. And again, both Subscriber Solar and the Community Renewable Energy Program provide direct electricity to Rocky Mountain Power service area. So we get our energy straight from those solar farms, in addition to the other resources available, but it's what we will be directly paying for. But I think what makes the Community Renewable Energy Program is unique, and one of the many things is kind of what we're doing right now. Is it's really community based, and what has been culminating over the past year and a half with different communities coming together and trying to figure out all the the hard details and the hard questions about the program, coming to you folks, forming agreements and really working together as a community to try to achieve this, to help make Utah's energy portfolio cleaner, and help help Utah in the fight against climate change. And so and then finally, the scale is compared to what's available to what we're planning on doing is not even on the same same level. Subscriber solar right there is 50 megawatts. What we're doing is 1,800 megawatts, which is massive. I mean, it's Luke can probably correct me on this, but I think it's something like a fourth of the energy part of Rocky Mountain Power's portfolio. And so it really would do a huge amount to shift Utah more rapidly towards renewable energy. Help decrease emissions from power plants that otherwise would be providing that power, and really put Utah on the map in terms of it's never been done before. What we're trying to do in working with a monopoly utility to try to come up with a way for communities to make their own energy choices. And so this is being looked at across the nation as a potential model. And if we pull it off and if we succeed, I think it will go down as one of the true, great achievements in renewable energy for Utah and across the nation. And so that's really my quick summary. Christopher, were we doing questions, or we're jumping straight into the next section?
I think if folks do have questions, please either hang on to those or put them in the chat. I don't think we've got time to do questions right now, just to make sure we get through all of our agenda. But if you do have questions, please do put those in the chat. And one of the things we're hoping to do today is any questions that we're not able to answer in the meeting itself, we're hoping to collect and compile and put into a larger FAQ document that we can put on our website. So if we can't answer your question today, we will make a record of it and make sure that we track down an answer to it. So thank you, Michael. Shannon, if you would please go to the next slide. Great. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce John Brems with Mill Creek. John Brems is an attorney and has been heavily engaged in our governance subgroup meetings and the drafting of the agreement. And so he is with us this morning to give a quick overview of that agreement. So John, I am going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good. A form of the agreement was sent out this morning as part of your packet, and we apologize that it's so long, but it has to cover a lot of issues. So my goal here is to give you a 30,000-foot view of this agreement. I'll start off pretty basically and then identify some of the issues that were resolved in this agreement, how we did them, and then we dig into them later in specifics. So Utah legislature enacted 54-17-901, which contemplates the creation of a community renewable energy program. And in order to participate in this program, government entities had to adopt a resolution by December 31, 2019. And each of you did, and that's why you're here, expressing an interest, not necessarily that you will commit, but an interest to evaluate or explore this. The statute contemplated that the Public Service Commission would adopt rules regarding the Community Renewable Energy Program, and they adopted these rules in January of 2020. So we've got statute and the rules. Oh, I probably ought to tell you bullet. Okay, next bullet. Here we go. Next bullet. So the statute and the rules contemplate an agreement among participating communities and the energy supplier. In this case, this is Rocky Mountain. And so that the communities could speak with one voice, it contemplated that the communities join together in an agreement. And this is the agreement that we've passed out. The statute and the rule contemplates that every person in the community participates unless they opt out. So this is a big deal for your citizens. Likely they're going to be in unless they opt out, and they'll get 2 notices to opt out, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Next bullet. So we determine what type of an agreement ought we to use, and there's a couple of examples that we look to. For example, the Unified Fire and Unified Police, they're interlocals. So we decided that we would use the interlocal concept as an agreement between government entities. We had to also decide or make a decision-making process. We also had to deal with dispute resolutions if there's disputes. Then we had to allocate cost and expenses, and basically who pays, and is that a fair allocation of expenses and cost. Then we had to discuss, or another item we had to resolve is allocating administrative responsibilities. Rather than setting up a separate entity that required a budget and a budget hearing, we thought we would form an association and each of the members would participate and provide some level of service for the group. Then we also had to deal with exiting and withdrawal. How do you get out and what happens? Okay, next slide. So we have been meeting since February of 2020, a year, working through how to approach or to deal with this. And then many of the attorneys have joined in a meeting, and we've held 5 meetings in January and February to fine-tune this agreement. And we tried to get a consensus. And so far, we've had a consensus. We've worked through what makes sense and identified those and drafted them. So the key elements of the agreement, and this is the 30,000-foot view, is we created a cooperative agency. So it's not a separate entity that has its own tax ID number and has its own PTIF account or its budget. And it has a board that administers and controls and directs the affairs of this agency. Next bullet. We contemplated that the board members need to be elected officials. And then we provided an option to designate another member as an alternate if the elected official can't make it. And that alternate needs to be basically a government official, an employee, something that has a relationship to the government entity rather than just a citizen participant. We had to decide how to vote, board decisions. This was an interesting one because we thought the best way to do it is give each entity 1 vote. But then we needed to have a provision that allowed an exception for that. And there's 2 or 3 exceptions. So the general rule is that each entity has 1 vote. There's an exception where you can take a weighted vote. So if you are a big consumer of power and you have a lot of people, you can have a weighted vote. And then there's 2 situations where you have to have a supermajority. And that's basically a protection, and that'll be discussed later, a cap on price increases or increases in the utility bill. You have to have a supermajority. Next bullet, that's the weighted voting we talked about. And the other built-in safeguards. Conceptually, if we decide, or if the board or if the entity decides that it wants to acquire resources, electrical resource that exceeds as a 10% increase in cost, then it requires a supermajority. So it's kind of a built-in protection from the board going crazy, so to speak. Next bullet. We wanted to provide flexibility to the entity because we couldn't contemplate all the decisions that were going to be made. So we create a provision that bylaws can be adopted, and that's where decisions will be made, meeting times, places, election of officers, creating committees, and hiring outside experts. Next bullet. Talked earlier about the cooperative in nature so that the communities will share administrative responsibilities. Next bullet. Really one of the tough ones. The voting is who decides, and the allocation of costs and expenses is who pays. So we had to devise a system that was fair. But we don't know what the future is. So we wanted to create some flexibility, and we'll go into that later. Next bullet. There's really two types of cost, and those had to be identified separately. The first type of cost is a shared cost. This would be example for hiring outside experts, paying the Public Utility Commission for the application, paying Rocky Mountain for their work. Those are shared costs. How are those costs to be shared among the members? Then there's non-shared costs, which are the notice that I mentioned earlier. Each person in your community is going to get what they call an opt-out notice. They're going to get it twice. And that is not a shared cost. So if you have a great big community, the cost for that is going to be more than if you have a small community. But that's going to be a direct cost that's not part of this cost sharing. Next bullet. We came up with a concept of anchor communities because we were going to have to engage consultants, attorneys, and start incurring expenses. We devised a concept that 5 communities, a minimum of 5 communities, would come together and agree to carry the whole burden if they're the only people or only entities involved. But as other entities involved, they will get credit, or it'll be netted out in their payment scheme to pay for these expenses. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Then as a result of this, non-anchors can budget a fixed amount to participate and spread that over 2 budget years. And when we get to some key dates, we'll show you how we did that. But so conceptually, we figured that it's going to take about $700,000 as a shared cost. That doesn't include the mailing cost and the opt-out notice. And that these 5 communities would take a portion of that $700,000 and budget and commit to pay that to go forward. But as other entities join and pay their share, they will either get the money back or it'll be credited against future obligation. Next bullet. The financial commitments are subject to appropriation. That's a thing you'll find, or a concept you'll find in the interlocal. And if you, next bullet, if you don't appropriate, it's not considered a breach. Then the exit and withdrawal. So we divided up the funding into 2 phases. The first phase, which is $350,000, is your share if you sign and enter into this agreement is due July 31, 2021, next budget year. So you can budget for that. You can join the agreement as late as January 31, 2022. Next bullet. Okay, so these are key dates. So March next month, we'll distribute the final agreement, and it will list the anchor communities, and we'll also identify, if all parties join, what your share of that 700,000 will be, and it's divided into two buckets, phase 1 and phase 2. Next bullet. So if you want to participate and be a voting member, you need to pay your fees. You have to sign the agreement. And since it's interlocal, you have to take them to your council. Council has to approve it. And then make your initial payments. And those are identified in exhibits to the agreement of what your initial payments will be. Next bullet. Then by October 31, the anchor communities that are municipalities will pay their phase 1, their share of that base payment, to make sure that we have a machine that can go forward. Next bullet. Next slide, I suppose. Then by January, is your last chance to join. If you want to join, you got to join by them and make your payment. Next bullet. By July 31, 2022, your second phase, or your phase 2 payment is due, and that's in the next fiscal year. So we've divided your payment up into 2 fiscal years, trying to make it a little easier on you. Then by October 31, 2022, anchor communities that are municipalities have to pay their phase 1 actual payment. Next bullet. And then, because counties are on a calendar year rather than a fiscal year, we also want to give them that same opportunity. So by January 31, 2023, their phase 2 payment, and then by January 31, 2022, their first phase. I don't think, you must have missed that one. So January 31, 2022, the first phase from counties is due. January 31, 2023, the second phase. So once again, we've divided the county's payment into 2 fiscal years. Next bullet. Oh. So just to know that this program only becomes effective after the Public Service Commission approves the plan and you adopt an ordinance establishing participation in the Community Renewable Energy Program. So it's not an absolute, you sign the agreement today and you're in forever. You get to participate, see if you like it, and there's withdrawal points you can get out if you don't like what's going on.
Great. Well, thank you very much, John, for that 30,000-foot view of the agreement. And we did include a draft of the agreement in the materials we sent out. If you did not receive that for any reason, let us know via the chat and we can email that to you. And now we had scheduled one of 2 breaks because 3 hours is a long time to go without a break. So let's go into our break and then plan to rejoin at 9:45. And we will begin again, and we'll have a presentation on the expenses and the costs. We'll go into a little bit more detail, and then we'll have our first small group breakout. So we'll see you all at 9:45. All right. I've got 9:45, so hopefully folks are coming back. And let's see, Shannon, are you back online?
Yes, I am. Sorry about that.
Oh, great. No worries. Great. Well, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So we're now going to take a deeper dive. So John from Mill Creek mentioned that there are expenses that we're expecting to incur as we look to implement the Community Renewable Energy Program. And how we share those costs is a big focus of the agreement, and the governance subgroup put a lot of thought into how to do that. Next slide, please. So let me start off by saying, okay, well, why do local governments need to pay for these implementation steps? And really the reason is because the way the law is written, the one that John referenced, is that our program that we're creating may not result in any shift of costs to non-participating customers. So while this program is still in its inception phase, we can't have utility customers at large covering the expenses. So that's why the communities themselves need to pay for these initial implementation steps. And so as we've looked at the requirements of the law and then the rules that go along with the law, we've estimated what we hope is a high-end cost estimate of $700,000 total, but that is apart from the noticing costs. And I'll talk a little bit more about the noticing costs later. So what is that $700,000 intended to pay for? $300,000 of that is budgeted, if you will, for legal and technical consultants who will be acting on behalf of the participating communities. And the rationale is that we as participating communities really need our own experts to help inform how we seek to design the rates and other technical aspects of the Community Renewable Energy Program and how it will interact with participating customers' electric bills. So that's an important piece. There's another $200,000 that's budgeted specifically for Rocky Mountain Power that helps cover their participation in the program design, as well as their time in filing our program application to the Utah Public Service Commission. And again, the reason why is because we can't shift costs to non-participating customers of the utility. And then finally, we've budgeted another $200,000 for our state regulators. That's the Utah Office of Consumer Services and the Utah Division of Public Utilities, for them to contract their own third-party consultants or expertise to review our filing when we make it to the Public Service Commission. So that's the $700,000 and where that number came from. Now, at the very bottom there, you'll see that the noticing cost estimate that I'm going to show you is basically derived from a cost per notice multiplied by the number of customers in each jurisdiction. And the way that will work in practice is we will design what the notice looks like, but because Rocky Mountain Power has all of their own customer information, the names and addresses, they will send the notices, but we will reimburse them on this cost per mailer times number of customers basis. Next slide, please. So for that $700,000, so the non-noticing component of the costs, how did we propose to share that among all of the communities who might participate? Well, after much discussion, what we landed on was we thought it would be fair to base the cost share percentages on two factors. One is the total population of each eligible community, and the other one is the total electric load of each eligible community. So we basically took the average of each community's share of the total of the population and share of the total electric load, and that's how we came up with our cost sharing percentages. And then, as John mentioned, we did our best to try to spread out the payments for any interested communities over 2 fiscal years, both encompassing if you are a city and if you are a county. The noticing costs, again, would be shared. They're not really shared amongst the communities. Each community pays for their own customer noticing costs. And let's go to the next slide. So, and you should have this as a separate document, either emailed to you or I posted a link in the chat so you can see the PDF version of this spreadsheet. But basically what this spreadsheet shows is in the green column, well, let me start with the white column, the one all the way at the left. That is the list of all the eligible communities. So these are those communities that passed a resolution by the required date. Then the green column shows the cost allocation percentage, which is based on the population and electric load, as we just talked about. And you'll see that those sum up to 100%. And then in the gray column, you can see the total non-noticing costs. So that $700,000, if you break it out by each of those percentages in the green column, that shows each community's calculated total of calculated portion of the total. And so then in the blue columns, that follow, that is the budget guidance for the phase 1 and the phase 2. So it's just taking the total in the gray column and splitting it over 2 different payments in 2 different years. And then in the white column, you will see the noticing cost estimate. So that's only for the communities who decide to go all the way through all the steps and pass the ordinance. Once they pass the ordinance, then there is a noticing requirement. So that's the 2 notices. And these numbers came from Rocky Mountain Power with what they received as how much it would cost to send the first notice and send the second notice, multiplied by the number of customers in each jurisdiction. And so that shows up as budget guidance in the last blue column, which we would anticipate sometime in, maybe fiscal year 2024 or 2025, or for counties in calendar 2023 or 2024. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, before you do that, Shannon, my apologies. You'll notice that there's 2 red boxes over Colville. That's because I didn't receive the number of customers for Colville initially, and I wasn't able to track those down before our meeting, but I have requested those numbers, and I will update this information as soon as I have that information. So apologies to Colville, but we will track down that number of customers. Next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to, so one of the things that we heard in our governance subgroup, one of the challenges that various communities said they faced is that they didn't know how to budget for a number that was potentially changing depending upon who was in and who was out. And so here's the question: will the cost for my local government change depending upon what other local governments decide? And using this anchor communities concept, the answer is no. So basically, a handful of communities make an anchoring commitment, a financial commitment, that will automatically fill the gap left by any community who decides not to join and not to move forward with the program. And so how does the anchor commitment work? So basically, the anchor communities will commit to maximum financial amounts that collectively equal the entire $700,000 implementation cost. So then in theory, if only that handful of communities decided to move forward and nobody else joined the effort, they could shoulder and pay for the total $700,000 implementation cost. Now, hopefully, we hope, and we've tried to make the agreement really accessible, and so we hope that a lot of the 23 eligible communities will decide to move forward. And so the way that works for the anchor communities is that as the non-anchor communities decide to join in and start making their phase 1 payment, each anchor community's anchor payment shrinks proportionally to the size of each local government's maximum commitment. So it's a little confusing and there's some math involved, but basically the anchors say, we'll do it no matter what. As others join in, their maximum payment shrinks. And as John said, when are the anchor payments due? For cities, or I guess technically the word is municipalities, the anchor payments are due October 31st, 2021. And for counties who would like to be anchors, their anchor payment for phase 1 would be due January 31st, 2022, so that it would occur in the next calendar year. And then for phase 2, it's very similar, October 1, 2022 for cities, and January 31st, 2023 for counties who would like to be anchors. Next slide, please. So I wanted to do just a very simplified illustration of how the anchor concept should work. And this is highly stylized and simplified, but hopefully it gets the concept across. So in this example, imagine we've got a $700,000 cost that we need to pay for. And you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 communities labeled A through D who are each eligible to participate. And community A that's shaded in this example is an anchor community. Please advance the slide, Shannon. So when the initial payment due date arrives, in this hypothetical, very simplified example, 3 of the communities with the green check marks decide to sign on and move forward with the program, but community B decides not to sign on and won't move forward. So then in theory, they're leaving a $100,000 gap because they're not at share. Please advance the slide. So the way that that is resolved by the anchor community in this case is that community A's share grows to fill the gap left by community B. So communities A, C, and D still make up and are able to pay for the entire $700,000 implementation cost. Now in practice, we are hoping to have 5 or more anchor communities who would play this role, and each one would agree to some predetermined amount that they are willing to make as a maximum anchor payment. And so between all of their phase 1 payments and their anchor commitments, you would get to the 700,000. And then as other communities decide to join in, each community's anchor payment shrinks proportionally. Next slide, please. So we are now going to go into our next, sorry, I should say our first small group and report back. And so let me just say a little bit about how we envision this working. So when we break, so Shannon is going to break us all into small groups. We're hoping these are no more than 5 or 6 in each small group. We're going to have one person who's been involved with the governance subgroup attend each one of these small groups just to act as sort of a facilitator to kind of move through the questions that we're planning to pose. We would ask, once we get into the small groups, please do unmute yourself. And if you're able to, please turn on your camera just so you can kind of see each other. And then if anybody here is on the phone, and I don't think we do actually have anyone, but if you are on the phone, unfortunately, we can't put you in a small group. So anyway, the questions that we're hoping to pose to you in these small groups is, what questions do you have about the program expenses and the cost sharing as we've described them? And then as a second question, what budgeting challenges do you anticipate as your community looks at whether or not to move forward with participating in the community renewable energy program? And then what we're going to ask is for each group to kind of hopefully collectively decide, like, what is the most important question or challenge that everybody comes up with that you would, as a small group, like to bring back to the large group? And so each of our small group conveners will be taking some notes, just so that, because we know we won't be able to answer every question, we want to make sure to capture them all. And then for the most important question or challenge that each group wants to bring back to the large group, we'll either answer it if we can, or if we can't, we'll record it so that we can make sure to answer it later. So with that, Shannon, are you ready to break us into our small groups?
I think so. Let's try this out and I will see you all shortly.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. Okay, it looks like we're slowly having folks join back from the small groups. I'll give just another couple minutes. Nope, I think, and I think that was exactly right. So our agenda has us picking us up back up at 10:25. So we'll now do 20 minutes of just reporting back from the small groups to the larger group. And let's see, and I'm going to make sure that we can take notes. So if there's anything we can't answer among everybody here, then we can, we'll make sure to take a note of it and we'll track down the answers. Okay, let me just check the number of participants. Okay, good. All right, so let's go ahead and let's see, is Carly there? I can't see you, but I think you're there, just lower on the screen.
I am here. Hi, Christopher.
Hi, so great. So yes, Carly, would you please report back from your small group? What were some of the most important, questions or challenges that folks identified?
Okay, I would say that there were kind of some big themes around the questions, and the way I would convey it is that it's sort of questions about how we can make sure we can control costs over time. So not just the initial $700,000 investment, but also just program costs over time, how we can be like how we can have control over those, how we can be certain of those, like how much control over our own destiny we have in this process, if that makes sense. I think what must be driving these questions is just sort of the uncertainty of a long timeline for a big project, as well as uncertainty over the next few years of how this all shakes out. And that's it.
And let me just make sure I've got that, Carly. So it's kind of like, how do the participating communities control like the costs? Do you think that extends to like customer bills when the program's actually up and running?
Yes, I think it includes both the ILA commitments, what that means, right? And the long-term rate, the rate design, the impact to the communities, all of those kinds of costs.
Okay. That's great. Well, I don't know that I could, or that any of us can really answer all of that. I think it's a great question. In terms of the ultimate cost to the customers, we will get into that a little bit later when we talk about voting. Basically broken out two different voting thresholds so that if the ultimate calculated increase in cost to participating customers would exceed a threshold of 10%, it requires a supermajority vote of both the communities and the electric load, the participating electric load. So it's a very, very high bar. If it's under 10%, the vote is just a majority of communities and electric load. And like I said, we've got slides and a whole part of our agenda that just focuses on the voting. So that is one type of a cost control mechanism that's built in. But I also do think that as this is formed and the board starts meeting, I think that will be, well, let me just say one other quick thing in terms of what it will cost customers. We, as part of our initial program filing, the communities and Rocky Mountain Power will have to make an estimate. It says over the next 10 years, what do we estimate this participating in this program will cost for each type of customer class? So residential, commercial, there's lots of different flavors of commercial. So we'll have those estimates because they're required as part of our application that we jointly submit to the Public Service Commission. So that's we don't know that answer now, but we will know that answer hopefully later this year.
Christopher, can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
And part of that, what that process looks like is once we decide, what type of assets, whether, wind, solar, battery storage, geothermal, or whatever, once that resource mix is selected, we will essentially lock into a contract with the utility saying we're going to pay X amount for a given period of time. And so that amount will be put into a larger cost formula that the utility uses to calculate costs for all of its customers. And so that will have a specific fixed price for the resources that we purchase, but then that'll be grouped in with, sort of larger costs such as transmission upgrades or substation upgrades or whatever. And then that will eventually spit out kind of the final number that the customer sees on their bill. And so we'll be able to, know our specific pricing for the resources we're buying. What's unknown is what's going to happen in the macro energy world down the road. And so that's where all these kind of cost projections come into play. And they're fairly accurate. They don't always get it right. I would say that they've been underestimating the cost savings with renewables for years, but overall, their modeling scenarios are really good and can give a general idea of what the cost for individual customers will be.
That's a really good point, Michael. And one of the great attributes of renewable energy sources is that they tend to be pretty fixed price, as opposed to a lot of fossil fuel sources where there can be some variability, either higher than you expected or lower, because they are commodities themselves, and there's a price for gas and a price for coal. So those should be relatively fixed once we start entering into specific contracts, as Michael said. So hopefully that started with to answer at least some of those questions, and I've made some notes so that we can make sure to include some more information about that, for the website, or if you've got other follow-up questions, I think we're happy to chat more. Just in the interest of time, I do want to go to our next small group for a report back, which actually is Michael.
Thanks, Christopher. We did not have that many questions. We more just kind of had a larger discussion about the program and how we kind of came upon the structures that we did for both cost sharing and the governance structure, and kind of just chatted about the anchor communities, and then kind of just larger electricity, energy world discussion in general. So no sort of, I would say, major questions posed, but if I'm incorrectly stating that, somebody from the group, please jump in.
Would anybody from that subgroup like to add anything? And you don't need to. Okay, great. Let's go on to our next group, which is, I don't know why I keep getting lost in here, which is Luke. Luke, do you want to report back any high-level takeaways from your group?
Yeah, happy to. I'll keep this brief. So the cost questions mostly focused around the anchor community side, right? To understand when we have the next discussion around what an anchor community is and how it backs and that side of it too, which we'll actually cover later. But Cliff Notes version, if you're interested, just email Christopher Thomas and we'll get you signed up for the anchor community meeting of just balancing out the spreadsheet of understanding what costs would be. We covered the budgeting timeline as well. We covered kind of the background of the bill. And I think the other thing too is just, the governance starting off this process by reading the governance document will seem overwhelming. So let's start at the high level, run you through these pieces, and then we can show you how it ties into the governance document. So that's just kind of a key piece to understand. And also all these timelines on that side of it can get confusing. So if there's any way that some of the governance group can help, some of the folks presenting, or your small group leader could help just run you through, again, the high level piece, both as a staff member or as a council member. Please reach out, because we've been living and breathing this for over a year, and reading through a governance document is not a fun time.
That's great. Thank you, Luke. And actually, there was one metaphor that I liked in our group. I mean, I know I probably shouldn't be saying this unless I'm next. Let me check. I guess I didn't put myself in here. Interesting. Okay. There was a metaphor in our group that was like an accordion. So the anchor communities are kind of like the accordion that like expand to fill up the total cost commitment if certain communities decide not to move forward. The other word that was said in our group that I think was really good is backstop. The anchor communities act as a backstop for any of the communities who decide not to move forward. And so they basically say, well, if you're an anchor and we've gotten collectively to $700,000 worth of anchor financial commitments, those communities all by themselves could shoulder the entire implementation cost. But of course, I think anybody who's interested in being an anchor community wants as many to join on as possible, because it really does make it cheaper for everyone involved, the more communities that participate. But the anchors are really just providing cost certainty to those who may not be fully invested yet and are still weighing whether to join or not. Let me go next to, Samantha. Samantha, were there any high-level takeaways from your small group that you wanted to share back?
Yeah, my group had a lot of really great thoughts, and we agreed kind of the big ones we discussed were concerns about how low-income customers will be engaged in this program and protected, and then also concerns about maybe what it looks like cost-wise for communities that have a really high industrial load, and what the cost split looks like in considering that kind of unique situation with a high industrial load who may or may not opt out of the program. And then other questions that were already touched on by other group members.
That's great. So I've got concerns about how low-income customers will be engaged and protected. And then concerns about costs for communities who may have a large industrial load, who may or may not, who the customers themselves who may or may not decide to be part of the program once they have an opportunity to opt out.
Right. And we discussed a little bit about the low income.
Uh-oh, we just lost Samantha, or at least I did. I'm gonna shut off my video real quick and see if that helps.
We also discussed a little bit about how in addressing the industrial load situation, that is part of why the costs are also averaged out with population. But if you have anything else to add, I think that's really helpful.
And Samantha, at least for me, you cut out for a second.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. But I think I heard the part about the industrial customers, and that's a big reason why we decided to do the average of the population and the electric load.
Exactly.
The population's a more stable number than the electric load. But could you repeat the part about the low-income customer part?
Yeah, I was just mentioning that we also discussed that the bill itself, House Bill 411, does require a low-income engagement plan for each community that can be unique to communities or can be kind of shared among those who participate.
Great. And just to add a little more color to that, so the law, HB 411, basically says that each community, well, there's the rules that implement the law, and they require that each community who wants to be a part of this program has its own low income customer plan. And it doesn't say what that plan has to be. It just says that each community needs one. And so I suspect that once we have our agency formed and we have our board up and running, that I could imagine that some of the communities may decide to work collectively on what a low income engagement plan might look like. So even though each community needs to have their own, I think it's fair to assume they can borrow heavily from each other. And it could be what the low income plan ends up being could be a mix of outreach activities. There could be some very specific community considerations. And there could be potentially some programmatic ways of planning for and around, our low income and our most vulnerable customers. So I think that is yet to be determined what is right for each community, but it will be an area of focus moving forward.
Great, thanks.
Okay, let me just see if that was all of our groups. Okay, I think that was everybody. I think we're a little bit early. We've got a break scheduled at 10:45, which is in 5 minutes. So let me just open it up since we've got a little extra time. Are there any other questions that anybody else wants to raise while we have this additional 5 minutes?
I guess I have a question about ultimate timeline. When do we anticipate actually going live with this sort of project?
Yeah, great question. And we do have actually Shannon helped design for us a timeline. And this is not set in stone. I mean, I think a lot of this, we're going to shoot to hit the timeline as well as we can. But, it may take us a little longer to come up with a utility agreement with Rocky Mountain Power than we think. Some of the analysis may take a little longer than we think. But we do have a proposed timeline. I'm going to put it in the chat so that everyone can take a look at it. And I think what it contemplates is that we could be looking at executing what's called a bid in response to a request for proposals for a new renewable energy source in like the March 2023 timeframe. But I think my guess is, and this is to be determined, but my guess is we'll see sets of new resources come online between like 2023 and 2030 so that we hit the goal of 100% net renewables in 2030. But I see Luke, please jump in.
Yeah, just quickly, Sarah, this might help kind of walk it along too. So the goal is by the end of this year to get the joint utility agreement ready to go, filed that's, so the good thing about that is that'll get the utility and the communities in most alignment around how this, on our filing that we submit to the Public Service Commission and the regulators. Then that process will take roughly a year-ish. One of the interesting things that we're working into that is also to have the initial RFP approved of that too. So once the program's ready to go, right? So let's say it takes 9 months-ish, 270 days is how long they take to do like a big rate case or something like that. Then we come out of that, then communities have to have 90 days to pass the ordinance and do all of the mailers and so on and so forth. But the cool thing is we can also go to the market right then with just kind of saying, hey, we're interested in seeing what's out there. So the process will kind of slog on a little bit through the regulatory piece, but we're trying to set ourselves up so we'll get the regulatory approval for the program and how we'll bring resources online and all the costs and stuff. So once that's approved, a community walking out of this will say, all right, I know I need to pass an ordinance. This is what we're expecting the costs will be. And then the other advantage of having that RFP right out the gate is we won't be taking assumed costs. We can actually start plugging in resource costs too. So we'll actually be able to start making decisions instead of getting the program approved, then getting the RFP approved, our goal is to kind of get all these things rolling. But hopefully 2023, 2024, we'll actually start making resource decisions as well. And the other interesting thing on this is, we'll be negotiating with Rocky Mountain Power through this time, but also remember, Rocky Mountain Power is shutting down 20 out of 24 of their coal units because they're no longer economically viable. They're bringing on large renewables as well. And our renewables can be anywhere on our 6-state grid that we're a part of. But this is the fun thing about being the community side, is we can say, hey, we want to weight Utah renewables a little heavier because there's a broader benefit to either our communities or the state or something along those lines, or like the SITLAs or whatever we want to do. So our goal is to get through the program phase, or the program approval phase. It'll take about a year-ish is our guess. And we don't know because no one's ever tried to pull this off before is the honest question, right? There's Montana's watching this, Oregon's watching this. They're following in our footsteps. But the good news is we've had some initial meetings with the utility. And back when we were writing the bill, we also had some great kind of high level meetings of just understanding where we can kind of really focus. So the goal is communities join the governance agreement, then we can start having those internal discussions so we can speak with one voice. We can also share our low income strategies and all this other stuff. The best thing we can do is kind of rip off the best ideas and get all this wrapped up and work with the utility to get something filed around December, January, and then that year, but then come out of that and ready to go. So it's a pretty tight timeline to bring on literally hundreds of millions of dollars of economic development in the span of, it'll be like 6 to 7 years.
So yeah, it is. Thanks for that, Luke. And it is a long process, and it's a little frustrating that it's so long. But yeah, as Luke said, we are sort of trying to do something that's new, and even these resources themselves take a while to get approved and built because they're pretty large scale. So does that answer your question? Okay, great. Okay, Shannon, if you would please, let's go to the next slide. And we now have a break. So please plan to be back here at 10:50, and we'll begin our next section, which is a deep dive into voting. Thanks, everyone. All right. By my watch, it is 10:50. So hopefully folks are starting to rejoin. So Shannon, if you are there, when you're ready, please go to, oh, great. Next slide. So I now would like to introduce to you all Samantha DeSeelhorst from Cottonwood Heights, although she also represents 2 other communities for sustainability matters, but she is going to do a deeper dive into voting. And then similarly to what we did with expenses, we'll then have a small group breakout and a report back. So Samantha, I'll hand it over to you.
Perfect, thank you. And if my internet goes, I give you full permission to just take over and do the voting for me. So good to see everybody. I hope you're staying warm and safe amid kind of a crazy storm. Hopefully everyone will be safe out there on the roads. I am going to give a bit more information on voting. And I'm going to start out kind of high level, and then we'll go a little bit more into the weeds later on. So the governance agreement proposes really 2 different methods for voting. They can be thought of as pre-implementation voting and post-implementation voting. Pre-implementation voting referring to votes before the program is implemented, and post referring to votes after it is implemented. So in terms of pre-implementation voting, this really implements kind of a simple community vote for decisions with the option for communities to call for a weighted vote. The vote will be weighted by what's called participation percentage. And this is kind of an element that changes throughout the timeline, and we'll see that. But that's kind of the high level pre-implementation summary. And then in terms of post-implementation voting, some decisions may still be made through those simple community votes, through the weighted votes, but post-implementation voting also introduces 2 new voting types. So it introduces a voting mechanism for changing program elements. So if previously agreed upon program elements are proposed to change, approval must be given from a supermajority of participating communities and a majority of the electric load. And then for procuring new resources, generally a approval from the majority of communities and majority of electric load is needed, except kind of in a certain circumstance. So we'll get into that later. Next slide, please. So for pre-implementation voting, a little bit deeper here, these are general votes that need to be taken at a meeting where a quorum is present. They require at least a majority of board members present and voting for approval. And for the weighted element, any 2 board members can call for a weighted vote that then requires at least a majority of, again, the participation percentage. So let's get into that a little bit more. If you'll move forward one, thank you. So what is participation percentage? You will see that it kind of shifts throughout different segments of the program's timeline. So originally, it's going to be kind of the original weight that we've been talking about. It's going to be based on each community's or party's average of population and electric load in relation to all other participants who sign on to the agreement. Then moving forward, kind of from August onward to the program submittal date, this participation percentage will be based on each party's phase 1 payment obligation, including phase 1 initial payments and any phase 1 anchor payments, if applicable. Then moving on to the program submittal date through the end of the implementation period, it kind of mimics the previous one, just this time with phase 2 payments. So this participation percentage will be based on parties' phase 2 payment obligations, including initial and anchor payments for that phase. And then after implementation, the participation percentage is actually based on each party's share of actual participating customer electric load. Okay, Shannon, we can move forward. Thank you. So then for post-implementation voting, again, some decisions may still be made in the mechanisms I've just described, but to provide a little bit more tailored voting systems for unique decisions that might come up, for altering program elements, all participating communities need to vote, not just those who happen to be present at a meeting. And we need at least a supermajority or 2/3 of board members' approval and at least a majority of the participation percentage approval, which at this point is electric load. And then in terms of procuring new renewable resources, votes for these decisions are also required of all participating communities, so not just those present at meetings. And we're going to be kind of basing the mechanism off of what's called the incremental rate impact that looks at the rate impacts of our new renewable rate. And if that impact is calculated less than 10%, approval for new resources is required from at least a majority of board members and at least a majority of the participation percentage, which again, at this point is electric load. But if the calculated impact is 10% or greater, it requires a little bit more consensus. It requires at least 2/3 or a supermajority of board members and at least 2/3 of participation percentage. So that kind of runs through those more unique voting mechanisms. Let's move forward one, Shannon. And then this is just meant to kind of provide a visual for what we've just described. We see on the left that this is the pre-implementation phases of the program where that simple community majority vote will be used with the option for the weighted vote. And then on the bottom blue row for each column, we see what the relevant participation percentage would be considered for each of those phases. And then in the right here in the yellow, we see the post-implementation voting and kind of those more specific voting scenarios that we've described. So all of this is kind of meant to say that the voting mechanisms have been designed to change throughout the program in hopes of most accurately representing who's participating. We wrestled a lot with how the voting should be done, and this was kind of the consensus-based decision to try to have it be most representative, and we're interested in getting your feedback on that. Let's move forward one. So that is kind of all I have. I kind of sped through that presentation. I'll defer to Christopher if we want to break out into small groups, or if anybody from any of the presenters want to add anything, by all means, please do so.
Thank you, Samantha. Let me just check the time real quick and see where we are on our agenda. Great. So yeah, I think we can just break into our small groups a little bit early. And so Shannon, whenever you are ready, please go ahead and split us up. And I believe that we will be in the same small groups as before. So hopefully you should recognize the other folks. And similarly to last time, we just have a couple of kind of guided questions. You know, what questions do you have about the voting structure that we've envisioned with this agreement? And do you have any concerns about the way that the voting has been envisioned to happen over the course of this agreement? And then similar to last time, we will come back to the larger group at 11:30 for a quick report back and further discussion. So I guess any questions from anyone before we break out into our small groups?
I had just one question.
Yes.
It relates to something I read, and it has been stated here today in the proposed agreement about admission of new members. You earlier stated, or someone did, that after the passage of 411, there was a date in 2019 by which communities needed to sign up, and we're all here because we did so. But could you give an explanation of, and the agreement says unless the act is changed, could you give us an explanation of what the thinking you think might be, why they'd be so restrictive, and whether it might be possible to get other subscribers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me take a first stab at that. So I believe, and I was not on the inside of these negotiations, so I can't say exactly what the thinking was. Maybe, and Luke, you're welcome to join in and provide some additional insight. But I think in general terms, the utility wanted some end date they wanted some sort of cap on what the program would be, and I think it mainly has to do with the size. And so like a program whose size would be a maximum of say 20 megawatts worth of resource is really different than a program of unlimited size. And so I think they just wanted some sort of a capping mechanism. And so the way that showed up in the legislation was they had to pass the resolution by December 31st, 2019. The 23 did. And I think it would be challenging. This is just my personal read. I think it would be challenging to go back and alter the act because we're kind of still implementing the first instance of the existing act. That's just my personal take. I'll hand it over to you, Luke.
Yeah, so Councilmember Robinson, I'll run you through the high level strategy of why we kind of had the window to get in and then the program moving forward. So the program moving forward, what we want to do is make sure everyone aligned under a single goal, because to figure out the rate impacts is going to be a very complex process, right? Of understanding when we bring these new renewables online, depending on how it balances out the grid. So just to do this for 40% of the state's population is going to be a very complex piece. And let's say, Summit County is going 100% and Park said, well, we want to go 50% or some of those lines. It actually makes it even more complex. So the goal was, first of all, let's get everyone around a single goal and a single timeline, because every time you have a different timeline, again, it makes it not linearly more complex, but actually it's almost an exponential feed because each goal would impact the other goals. The thought behind the communities passing resolutions to participate in December was same thing. That way we can start looking at what this limited pot was, because we really want to know when we go through the rate design of understanding roughly how many resources will come online, because depending on the amount of resources will also impact each individual rate differently. So you have your residential, your commercial, your irrigation, your industrial, and that side of it too. If there's a large push, let's say that there's a large push to say, hey, there are 4 other major communities that want to join this, or other communities that want to join this. Christopher hit it well. HB 411 was it was a tightly crafted bill, as you got to see as well, Mr. Robinson. But I also believe that, if everyone came back around and said, hey, the program gets through the program adoption, and there's a bunch of other communities that want to join, and it makes sense to open the door back up, we could have those discussions. Representative Handy, who helped pass the bill, I just talked to him last week. I think it'd be one of these things that conversation could happen down the road if it would make sense. Or maybe, the flip side of it too is maybe Rocky Mountain Power is going to bring on so many new renewable resources that it'll be such an incremental change of like a 2% change or something like that of how many they need to bring on. We might have to modify this in the future as well. But truthfully, the goal was to say, hey, we need kind of this almost like pot of 100% renewable participants to run through and understand all these impacts, because there's no other model. And if there's a lot of entering and exiting, that will cause disruption in the model. So we wanted to kind of say, we need everyone to align around a single goal, and we need to kind of understand who's in so we can start designing the program. And as we go through program design, if we say, hey, it actually is not that big of an issue to include another large community or this county or that county, we could always have those conversations later, but we wanted to kind of focus with this finite group first, because the rate complexity and design is going to be really, really complex. And then we can always look through it after we get through the program design piece, but we didn't want to have, I'll just use this, imagine if Salt Lake City was stepping in and they say, we're back out. Oh, we're back in, we're back out. That will that would substantially change how many resources we're bringing online and offline and what that does to everyone's rates. So we wanted to kind of lock that in firmly. And I think if there are many communities that wanted to join, we could always have that discussion. The bill did pass with 2/3 majority in the House and Senate, but it also failed out of committee originally too. So there's always a risk to that too, of putting the whole bill to risk. But again, I think it'd be one of these conversations. Let's get through program design and see if there's a bunch of folks raising their hand saying, hey, we want in on that. And maybe we have it at both the House Bill 411 community side, but maybe it's truthfully a statewide conversation at that point of saying, hey, this 100% thing makes a heck of a lot of sense. Why aren't we doing this for all of the ratepayers in the state, not just this subset of communities? So I hope that answered your question, Chris. If it didn't, let me know.
It did, but you mentioned 40% of the population. You say these 23 communities. Well, how do they really represent that much of the population, and how many megawatts or gigawatts does that group potentially represent?
No, great question. So this is why we did the balance of population versus electric load too, because some communities have a high industrial, high commercial, and other ones are heavy residential. I mean, just look at the makeup of communities and towns. I'll double check on the numbers. It's either, I believe it's 40% of the state population and 25% of Rocky Mountain Power's total annual electricity sales. And I'll double check on those, but if everyone participated, I believe it's in that range. So it's significant. So looking at if everyone remained in, you're looking at, just around 8 gigawatt hours of need. So again, electricity 101 kilowatt hours, 1,000 kilowatt hours, megawatt hours, 1,000 of those is a gigawatt hour. So it's significant builds. And I believe the total capacity, so you have the annual need, but also the capacity, we're in that, I believe we're in the 2 gigawatt range, depending on what resources we bring online. So it's, if you multiply that out, that's in the just over $1 billion impact. And then on top of that, you have like transmission, battery storage, and all those other things that'll add in too. So we're sitting in the, $1 to $2 to $2.5 billion of potential economic impact for both the state and the region.
That's huge.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but thank you, that Christopher and Luke, that was great. I know we want to get to the small group.
Oh, great. Yes, thank you both. That was a great question. I think it'll be on our minds as we kind of move through and see which all communities decide to sign on. And then that will really impact that, that total size. But it could be a massive new renewable energy build out investment in Utah if we build resources here, jobs, all those kinds of impacts. So yeah, let's go ahead and move to our breakout groups. And let me just ask quick, do folks feel like you need the full 20 minutes, or should we just have the small groups, be 15 minutes long?
I think that would be appropriate, Christopher. I think
Okay.
Order is fine.
Great. So let's only go for 15 minutes and plan to come back at whatever 15 plus 8 is. I can't do math in front of other people.
23.
23. Okay, let's be back at 23 after the hour.
Sounds good. I'll put you all in your groups again now.
Great. Thank you. Oh, and also Shannon, just so you know, I think there's somebody else maybe waiting in the waiting room.
Thank you.
We may need to talk to them. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Joe. Thanks for joining again. We are just in the middle of a breakout session that will wrap up in about 5 minutes. If you want to hang tight, or I can add you back to the group you were in last time.
No, that's fine. Sorry, I had to jump off for a minute.
No worries.
Okay. Well, great. I see that folks are coming back to the large group. I'll just give another minute for folks to join back. We'll start with our reports back from all the subgroups. And I see Carly. So yeah, Carly, let's start with you. Were there any highlights in terms of questions that folks had about voting or concerns about the voting structure that we've envisioned?
Yeah, so my group is actually composed of quite a few smaller communities. And so obviously the weighted vote scheme raises some concerns and just discussion about how that plays out, why that came about. I think some folks are still sort of processing whether we struck the balance correctly in the governance agreement, protecting the interests of the large investors, the bigger cities, versus making sure that smaller communities still are able to have their needs represented and have enough of a voice where their contribution isn't sort of meaningless at the end of the day. So we did discuss it quite a bit, and I know the governance agreement, the subgroup that we had, wrestled with it for a long time. So I think we're eager to hear about folks' thoughts regarding the balance we struck. And that was the main meat of our discussion.
That's great. Yeah, and we did wrestle with that quite a bit. And I've heard from others that there are other agreements where this similar question comes up, is how does the voting happen? What is it pegged to? Small communities versus larger communities. And so I think we've tried to build in components that recognize both of those, but you're right that there's different ways to strike the balance. And so I guess if folks have other thoughts and ideas, we will note those and make sure to discuss them within the governance group. But before we go to the next small group, does anybody else or any of the other subgroup governance members want to say anything more about that?
So I think it was a lot like the Constitutional Convention where Rhode Island and New York were arguing to do the best we could.
I thought we already gave the small states 2 senators. What more do they want?
Well, and I will say, once we get into the part of the program where we're making resource decisions, there are 2 votes that will be required before we would acquire any new resource. And so we would need to get both a majority of the number of communities. So in that case, the smaller communities vote is exactly the same as the larger communities. And we would need a majority of the participation percentage to vote. So basically, either the majority of communities has a veto, say, in a resource procurement decision, and a majority of the electric load also exercises a veto. So basically, each, from both perspectives, there's a control that's exercised before a new resource would be brought online as part of the program.
And Christopher, if I can just add to expanding on that, if the incremental rate increase is that higher than 10%, it's even greater consensus required with supermajority of those groups, which was a comfort to me throughout this process.
That's a great point. Okay, let's go to our next group, which I believe was me. I kind of skipped our group last time. I apologize about that. So what did we talked about? Oh, we talked about anchor communities, and do the anchor communities get any extra type of consideration for the fact that they are making an additional financial commitment should the need arise? And so I think the answer to that is yes. And the extra consideration is through the participation percentage. So once we get to August 1st, the participation percentage changes to reflect each community's phase 1 payment obligation and any anchor obligation that a community has voluntarily signed up for. So the anchors get a little extra participation percentage in the case of a weighted vote if they take on additional financial responsibility in the form of the anchor commitment. So I think that was one of the main things we talked about. A couple others I'll just mention since we have time is there was a question about who will be on the board. And so we said each community that participates will get 1 board seat. The board member is defined as an elected official from that particular community or local government. However, that community can also appoint what's called an alternate. And so that alternate doesn't have to be elected. They could just be a staff person who works for the local government. And as the alternate, they would have the same powers and authorities as if they were elected, as if they were the main designated board member. So that was another question that came up. And then another one I'll just mention quickly is that there was a question of like, what will the posture of Rocky Mountain Power be toward the program? And so, I don't think we exactly know how these negotiations will play out. It could be easier, it could be more complicated. But I think we'll have to wait and see once we get into the negotiations with the utility, with the communities. We'll have our own expert consultants. They'll bring their kind of regulatory and information folks to the table, and we'll have to work out something. Whatever we come up with has got to be acceptable both to our communities and to Rocky Mountain Power. That's the only way we'll get to the next step of actually having a proposed program.
And really quick to add into that though, the utility is not opposed to this program at all. They help write the bill, right? So let's just start there. We jointly went with them to write the bill. We've been, and there'll be areas that we disagree on, but for them, this makes a lot of sense because they actually get to figure out what this new potential future will look like. So they're coming to the table as a willing participant, unlike the rooftop solar where they're coming in to undercut it.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. And yes, and when this bill was lobbied on and passed, was Rocky Mountain Power was working on the bill. So you're exactly right. And I believe the utility can also submit proposals for some of the resources we might choose from. So they're not by any stretch cut out of participating in this renewable energy future that we're hoping to build. So that's great, Luke. Let's go to our next group, which I believe is Michael. Were there any takeaways?
Sorry, I'm trying to not too many. I think we just kind of talked about the overall structure, and then went over the sort of long-term timeline of the program in general. So sorry, nothing much to add.
Great. And if anybody else, since we just have a little extra time, if anybody else from Michael's group wants to chime in, please do. But if not, we will move on to our next group, which is Luke. Luke, any high-level questions or concerns that folks had?
Just really quick, we just went through the timeline of payment and voting and just kind of the overall program piece, and then how the voting, your kind of proportional voting piece will change once the program's fully up and running, right? So when we're going through and the program's not fully up and running, up until it's approved and we've gone through all the pieces, we went with that balanced electricity load and population. And then once the program's up and running, we're gonna make it reflect actuals. And the great thing is those actuals will get updated annually. So one of the folks in my group said, hey, if we have a major development that comes in, how will that affect our voting rights? And the goal on that will be, well, it'll get reflected in that kind of year's update. And then also we just talked about some of the other kind of basic program mechanisms of, someone moves into our community or a new business comes online, how are they notified about this? And they're automatically enrolled. And then they have the same thing. They have an opt-out period to decide if they're in or out, but everything will get balanced on an annual basis once the program's up and running.
Great. Those are great. And I'm just taking some quick notes. Cool. Let's, I think our last small group is Samantha. So Samantha, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks. So our conversation centered largely around the incremental rate impact and kind of wanting a little bit more of a primer on what that means. Is this an impact directly to ratepayers' rate? What does that mean? And then also in that same context, why was the 10% threshold selected? So I'm wondering, I don't know, Christopher, if you want to give some context to that, but I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is a little complicated. Part of the complexity comes from the fact that, and actually, if any of you own a small business, or if you're familiar with your local government's power bill, the way that the bill that you receive at home from Rocky Mountain Power will look different than the bill that you receive at work or for your small business. Basically, there's a very elaborate exercise which tries to attribute specific costs of the electric system to specific customers. And so it's pretty complicated. So figuring out exactly how to describe the threshold and what it should be is a little tricky. So what's currently in the agreement uses a concept called revenue requirement. Revenue requirement is a complicated term, but it basically just means what is the total amount of money that the utility would need to spend on you if you were in the program versus if you were on the standard offer. And so the way that the agreement says that it will calculate the incremental rate impact is it will say, okay, anytime our agency wants to bring a new resource online, we look at the cost of that new resource, the revenue requirement, we add it to any existing resources that we've already acquired, and we say, what is the revenue requirement of all of those resources together? And is it 10%? Well, what percentage more is that than what it would be for those same customers if they were on just the standard regular offer from Rocky Mountain Power? Now, this is not to say that the community renewable program will be more expensive. We actually don't know. And I think, as Michael said earlier, renewable energy in many, if not all markets, is some of the cheapest new power that you can build. So we're not saying that it will be more expensive, but there's at least a trigger or a check that before the agency would bring any new resource online, this calculation would be made. And then if it falls below the 10%, it's the majorities that decide. If it's 10% or above, it's the super majorities that decide. And really that was the reason we put in the more than 10% was because, what if we calculate it and it's 10.1%, and we know that the program is popular, it's been in place for several years, and we wanted at least a mechanism that if everybody agreed, we could move forward with the resource procurement at above the 10%. So anyway, I don't know if I've completely answered the question, but that was some of the thinking that went into that. In terms of the 10%, that is a bit of a shot in the dark. I think we'll have a much better, so once the agency is created, we'll have our board meeting, we'll be able to hire our technical and legal consultants, we'll be able to start working with Rocky Mountain Power, And so we will start to create projections for what this program would cost over the next 10 years to reach the goal. And I think we have to do that for each customer class. So residential, commercial, industrial, et cetera. So we'll have a much better idea of the actual, projected impacts later this year.
And Christopher, if I'm not mistaken, is there added flexibility built into the timeline for folks who maybe would like to wait and see a little bit more about those rate projections before signing?
Yes, exactly. So the hope is that, so some of our communities probably are just ready to go. We want to sign on, we're ready to make some financial commitments. Others might be like, well, wait a minute, wouldn't I rather wait and have a little more information before our community decided to sign on? And so that's one of the reasons that we said, okay, if your community wants more information, you can not sign on to the agreement immediately, wait, and then those communities can kind of monitor what's happening with the board and the agency as they're meeting, hiring consultants, creating cost projections. And then the idea is that we'd have a lot of those projections, if not all of them, done this year. And so communities who have not signed on can say, oh, let's review that first. And then we can make the decision to sign on as late as January 31st of next year.
Okay. Thanks for that context. That was pretty much what we discussed. Selfishly, I would like to change the term participation percentage because I think it's really hard to say, but that is just a selfish request.
Say that 20 times fast.
I tried to in the presentation and it didn't go well. I think it's really hard. It's a tongue twister.
So I think, let me just do a time check and see where we are in the agenda. So we're running just a little bit early. Unless there are any objections, I think we should move to our next part of the agenda, which is Luke and our next steps. So we really just wanted to provide one section right here at the end of our presentation where we just say, okay, we've given you a lot of information, a lot to think about, but end with, these are the next key dates. And is there any way that our governance subgroup can help support any of the interested communities as those dates and those milestones start to arrive? So Luke, I will hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So jump to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to run you through kind of the make you a to-do list here. And again, at any time, feel free to reach out to any of the folks that led your small groups or Christopher or myself if you need just kind of that next level of detail, or, when 8 o'clock tonight, you're like, oh, I have this kind of random question, please reach out. Kind of right out of the gates here, though, what we want to do is we really want to understand what communities are, interested in becoming an anchor community, because out of that, we want to have a meeting on these potential anchor communities to understand, the potential of these groups participating, because then we can lock down what these anchor community payments could be, right? If there are 4 participating anchor communities, or if there are 10 participating anchor communities, that'll change everyone's proportional share. So if you're interested in being a part of the anchor community discussion, email Christopher Thomas. His email is right there. He also sent you the meeting invite for this too. Hopefully by the end of this week, right? And truthfully, we just want to start seeing and sit down and go through the spreadsheet of costs and show, as communities would potentially participate, what that would happen to the anchor community payment, and to get folks to understand, hey, this is the ballpark what you're looking at if you want to be an anchor community. So that's kind of, if you're really interested, email Christopher as soon as you can the next few days, and we're going to get that scheduled, because the anchor community piece is actually going to be a part of the governance agreement as well. And I'll get into that in a second, but we want to get the anchor communities kind of lined up quickly to understand who's fully in. The other thing too is, through this February and March piece, we want to start to have the non-anchor communities, just participating communities, if you're interested in moving forward, again, start looking at the budget, and that will be based off of that I believe slide 19 of like, this is what your, proportional share of the total budget would be broken into 2 years. And we also tried to work in there both a municipality timeline and a county timeline, because we know that we're on different timelines for that too. The goal will be, though, is, just start talking through that, start, getting the votes and understanding that, and also peppering us back too of saying, hey, we have questions. Could you do a council level presentation to answer these questions on everything we presented today? In March, look for the governance agreement coming out, and, we'll have the anchor communities listed, the folks who are signed on. So that way, that's just a part of it. So who these folks are that might get a slightly a little bit more of a voting piece, but also showing, hey, this program is now financially backed. So that's another thing, is if you're just a participating community, you can go in and say, hey, our responsibility is this, and it won't change, if there are 10 or 20 participating communities. July 31st, what we're looking at is for the signers to get these phase 1 payments due. And the goal is just truthfully get the governance agreement signed and, put your money in, because once your money is in, that all of a sudden, that you can now vote. You can now help be the part of the decision. What we're trying to do is just nudge groups towards signing the agreement and also do the payment. And I'll show you kind of the latecomers piece to this as well. And then for the anchor communities, that October 31st anchor payments are due. And the reason we kind of staged it that way is with phase 1 payments coming in, we'll be able to adjust our anchor payment to cover the gap of remaining. So that's why it's kind of staged that way. And we have ways to balance the budget through it and stuff. Again, we took something that in theory is simple, ran it through every iteration we could think of, and out of it came a quasi complex, but not as originally complex as we were thinking. So we're looking at the anchor payment. So if you're interested in being an anchor community, we'd also be looking at that anchor payment due around October 31st. And this is for the municipality side. The county piece, because there's 3 of you, we can discuss how that plugs in as well. Let's jump to the next slide, and I hope this will answer the questions that people are raising their eyebrows about. You also have your last chance decision, right? So let's say you're sitting on the fence, you're not sure, you want to understand kind of more of the program piece. You've done everything that the legislation required you to do. And you can watch this proceed all the way up until right before the utility filing, right? And the goal on this is if you don't want to participate at that point, you just don't make the payment when the joint utility filement's filed, or you can wait all the way up until, right before the joint utility filing is ready to be filed, and you make you sign the governance agreement, you make your payment, and you sign the joint utility agreement. You could probably do that all in one meeting, but we have to know going into the filing who is in and who is out at that point. So the trigger for that is you can wait all the way up until the utility agreement's ready to go and we drop pieces in. Preferably, we wouldn't want to do that. And if you wait that long, you're actually not going to be voting because you haven't signed the governance agreement yet and you haven't made the payment yet. But if you wanted to sit back and audit and wait, you have that ability too. But there will be a deadline where you have to say, hey, we're in. So we sign the governance, the utility agreement, and make the first payment. Then we shift into July, right? July of 2022. That's when we're start looking at the phase 2 cost piece of it. So this is where, we took the 700,000, we split it over 2 years. So this is kind of the second level of that, right? To make sure that this gets all the way through the filings piece of it. We're hoping for a September-ish decision. And then as written in the legislation, communities have 90 days to adopt the ordinance. So this is another kind of key decision piece of, once you make kind of your payments, you're in the system, right? You're going along this. And let's say out the back end of the program, after it gets through all the regulatory stuff and all the intervening and how everything shakes out, you say, hey, this isn't a good fit for our community, or the times have changed. You can actually say, we're not going to pass the ordinance, and you're done, right? You can just back out at that point too. So the goal on this is just to get folks saying, hey, we're in, we're ready to go, we're ready to make the payment. So those are kind of the critical next steps. So I think we just have a small group piece if folks have questions about that, but high level, we're just trying to lay out just time periods, And there are multiple more discussions we understand that have to go on too. So just to float that out there too, of the small group piece, but also don't hesitate to reach out to the governance group if you need just another level of detail, or you need this to get described to your mayor, city council members, city manager, so on and so forth.
Luke, can I ask a clarifying question at this point that came up in my small group? Is the 19th the like end all be all date for interested communities to serve as anchor communities? There was concern brought up that folks might not know by this week if that's something they can do, or is that date more something to just express interest by, but don't have to commit?
Yeah, it's a balance, Samantha. I think you summed it up well. I'll use the played out analogy that I used for my small group. Is it's almost like the middle school dance. Some folks got to get on the dance floor, and we got to start dividing this up, right? Because what we're going to do on the anchor community side is we're going to look at total program cost and each anchor community, how that affects the payment. So again, if we had 4 anchor communities participate, payments will be X. If we had 10 participate, they'll each be proportionally reduced. So I think the goal is to say, hey, we're interested. Yes, expressed interest, or if you want to be a part of it, because there's probably some groups out there saying, hey, I'm kind of interested. We're small fish, but it might be interesting for us to be a part of. Reach out, because we want to get that done, because the anchor community piece ties into the governance document. So we want to make sure that we get the anchor community piece, truthfully, really firmly know who's in by mid-March, have folks say, yes, we're definitely in, we're budgeting for this. And then we can then roll that and show the impact on the governance document as well. Because we cite the anchor communities in the governance document. And then truthfully, the anchor communities will most likely just start signing governance documents too, because we'll want to establish a quorum so we can start making decisions. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, Samantha.
I would just add quick too. I think that was great, Luke. So yeah, if you're interested, feel free to send me an email. But there's nothing magical about the 19th. I think our main goal is we just want to, like Luke said, start seeing who's interested, and then we want to be able to circulate a final agreement with listed anchor communities during the month of March. So I think that's the real timeline or milestone that we're trying to hit, as we start these anchor discussions. Okay, well, we've got one more small group breakout. And actually, I don't think we've got time in the agenda to come back as a large group. So this is the last time we'll be all together in the large group. And so once your small group is done talking and your convener is hopefully, taking notes about the questions that come up, then you're free to go on with the rest of your day. And we really appreciate you all spending, 3 hours of your busy schedules with us. And hopefully we've answered some of your questions, and any that we didn't answer, we'll go back through the notes and work on those. And as Luke said, please do reach out to any member of our governance subgroup if you have additional questions or want to discuss anything else. So Shannon, would you please send us back to our small groups for one last time?
Sure thing.
Thank you. Hello. Let's see. I am just going to make sure to save our chat